That's the only way we're gonna be. Everybody singing this sweet refrain. Sing this melody till it's well, I've been talking to you, the Christian and the Hebrew. Anything to do, we got to unite, or else we are through. Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you, and welcome to the S.O.S radio program, Saving Ourselves, by uniting amongst ourselves and accepting the responsibility to build our communities. Saving Ourselves is presented by the Mid-South representative of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Student Minister Anthony Muhammad, and the believing community of Muhammad Mosque number 55, located at 873 Vance Avenue here in the city of Memphis. I am your host, Brother Andre Muhammad. And for today's program, we ask the question, what must we do to bring peace to our communities? You can call in to be a part of today's video broadcast by dialing 901-327. Got a discussion, very bad discussion. You can call in today dialing 452-3094 or 324-7490. You can join us via Facebook Live, or you can join us via, I'm not hearing anything. I'm going to have to go to commercial and see what's going on with this. America can change, but attitudes change slowly. It's something that we as black people must do to affect that kind of change. But if our people are jobless and in gangs and are the number one killers of themselves, then how can anyone looking in that picture see us as their people? So there's an awful lot of work for black men to black agitators, black organizations to do to lift our people up out of the quagmire that they are in. That is not on Barack Obama. He has the cross of America to bear, but the raising of our people is still our job to do. Man, you can tell by the news, we just always lose. It's white people's fault. Nah, better yet, Jews. I was a confused and abused child. Mama made my views foul. Damn, Obama, with excuses, I'ma use that. Yeah, can't use that. Now they can trace my dirt all the way back to where I choose at. Who's that? Peeking in my window, bro. Damn, the whole wide world, I can't pretend no more that I'm just a lost sheep who don't get the full letter. Gotta come deep, I gotta reap what I suck because I know better. Can't never put that Jesus back in the bottle. Because now we got a real nice black family role model sitting in that house that slavery built. Shit might have gave y'all hope, but it gave me guilt. I picture any black people gonna do the same thing. They pulling the plug on the blame game. It's on us. We must accept the responsibility to build our community. We don't have a community right now. And so we must build a community and get away from calling where we live the hood or the ghetto and save our youth from self-destruction. That pig don't get you. Just believe that bald eagle will. I'm telling you, my nigga, never learn y'all illegal skills because they finna kill. Any other way of eating this Satan world. Homie ain't beating them at cheating. You can't out devil the devil. Think it ain't sin. That's a flame at the end of the game that you can't win. Trying to fight evil with evil on any item. Now, if you know they wrong, then you gotta outright them. That's the only way you gonna make it today. Because anything else, Satan can take it away. Don't even worry about revenge and making them pay. They won't get scared. Just make sure you stay awake and obey your highest authority. Shit, I don't even ask about a lie. I'm too busy trying to keep my ass out the fire. Niggas better clean their act up and get sober. Because that he holding us responsible. Race is over. It's on us now. One of those that what is it gonna make you do as a man? When we look at Barack and Michelle and Sasha and Maria, to see a loving husband, a loving wife, a loving father, a loving mother, and two beautiful children, what a beautiful example they set, not only for us, but for America. You ain't got to be no criminal. Empty in a clip. You ain't got to be no video. You ain't got to strip. You ain't got to be no athlete to keep it real. You ain't gotta entertain. You ain't gotta have no sneaker deal. You ain't gotta dumb it down. You ain't gotta go soft. You ain't gotta sleep around and take your clothes off. You ain't gotta call her bitch. You ain't gotta like the world. You ain't gotta get rich to go get you a white girl. Times is changing right in front of our eyes. Possibilities and hype that our people can rise. So we can see ourselves ruling the world again. Resurrecting the head from a world of sin, as it was in the beginning, so shall it be in the end. From every child and soul to every kid in the pen. Don't get me wrong, I know this enemy's still here, but let me make this real clear. That responsibility is on us now. All right, assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you, and welcome to the S.O.S radio program, Saving Ourselves, by uniting amongst ourselves and accepting the responsibility to build our communities. Saving Ourselves is presented by the Mid-South representative of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Student Minister Anthony Muhammad, and the believing community of Muhammad Mosque 55, located at 873 Vance Avenue. I am your host, Brother Andre Muhammad, along with my co-host, Brother Kenneth X. And for today's program, we ask the question, what must we do to bring peace to our communities? You can be a part of today's discussion by dialing 901-452-3094 or 901-324-7490. You can also join us via the YouTube live stream. Just go to youtube.com and type in WMQM 1600 AM, and you should be able to see the both of us live on a split screen. If you can't get to a computer where you can watch us live, or on your smartphone, you can watch us live as well. You can join us via the TuneIn radio application on a smartphone or desktop. Just go to the TuneIn app, type in WMQM 1600, and when the icon populates, click on it, and you can hear us from wherever you are. You can use the old-fashioned tradition as well. Just go to your radio in your car or at home. Tune into AM 1600, and you can hear us live. And of course, I am about to now start finally my Facebook live feed. Unbeknown to you, maybe we had a slight hiccup when we got ready to get started today. Yes, didn't we, Brother Kenny? We had a little hiccup. But hey, we meet and overcome all obstacles in our path, so we are certainly thankful to be on. So now we're on live. Hold on, what's going on here? Flip you around. There we go. We're on live, and to my Facebook audience, we just are really getting started. I just was able to get logged on here, and I'm tagging my friends as I go to get you all on, let you know we're now broadcasting live on Facebook. But if you're on Facebook, you'll only be able to see me and hear me. You won't be able to hear or see Brother Kenneth. So the best way to tune in to get the full effect, if you will, of today's program, you should go to the YouTube live stream, and you can hear and see the both of us, as well as callers that may call in. Once again, today's subject is, what must we do? And we are asking the public, particularly the Black community, because we've had, of course, when the weather changes, Brother Kenneth, we always run into this rash of critical incidents and violence and whatnot. And this year is no different, and it seems like with every year it tends to intensify. Yes, sir. But we want to know, what must we do to bring peace to our communities. And before I forget, let me go ahead and open in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, the one God to whom all praise is due, the Lord of the worlds. We bear witness to the oneness of God, regardless of the land, label, the language that you choose to use. We don't argue over God's names. Spiritually mature people should understand that God has made himself known according to the language and culture of the people among whom he raised his prophets, his messengers and warriors. We bear witness to the oneness of God, and we honor and respect all of the righteous names by which the divine creator is known. We thank him for all of the prophets and the messages revealed through them to humanity. We'd like to greet you all As we say, Brother Kenneth, together in the great words of peace.
Assalamu alaikum.
So here we had it, we've started. So my brother Allah, I'll yield as I get things set in here, brother. Allow you to go ahead and greet the audience, man. We want to get it popping in here today.
Oh, yes, sir, brother. As always, I'd like to open up in the most holy and righteous name of Allah, beneficent, the merciful. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. And I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger. And I again want to greet you personally in that universal greeting words of peace of Assalamu alaikum, which the audience become familiar with that greeting, means peace be unto you. And when we offer you peace, what we are essentially doing is offering you a prayer.
That's right.
It's a prayer for your well-being, for your safety, for your family's well-being. Mm-hmm. And when you respond with the greeting of wa alaikum salam, then you are doing the same for me as well. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Hope you had a wonderful day. I'm so excited because sometimes the God gives you confirmation on what you're doing and it's making a difference. Mm-hmm. And being here in Memphis, Tennessee, one of the great cities, even though Memphis has its problems, but it is a great city, yes. Great history, great heritage. Mm-hmm. And before I say anything, I want to thank the Mid-South representative of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Student Minister Anthony Muhammad, for allowing me to sit in his seat with his permission. Yes, this is his seat. He is the representative of our leader, teacher, and guide today, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
That's correct.
And I'm here assisting him, serving at his behest, because he can't be everywhere.
That's right.
And what we need to do is to work hard and mature in our representation.
Yes, sir.
And try to get the people to see the Mid-South representative, Student Minister Anthony Muhammad, in the proper perspective, because many do not know him because they don't see him on the Bluff City channels, West New and Memphis, because he's working behind the scenes.
That's right.
And here's a brother that has dedicated a better part of his life to this city.
Mm-hmm.
And has come up with several initiatives that I know of personally firsthand. We were blessed to be out in the community yesterday with our student captain, Anthony J. Muhammad, and some of the brothers from the West area, and was able to participate with them.
Yes,
I got a message from a listener, Brother Andre, and
yes,
this goes to show that anytime that we're on this program,
yes,
there are people listening. Sometimes, we say we wish more people would call in, but as we know, people call in for foolishness. But when you're dealing with
serious discussion,
people are sitting back saying, I never thought of it that way. A couple weeks ago, Allah put it on your heart to have our sisters on.
Yes, sir.
Dealing with the black female, disrespected and unprotected. And you brought out a statistic that there are 75,000 missing black women and girls. That's a whole city. And the sister was bearing witness because she had heard Sister Aisha, who was on with Sister Donna, Sister Dequetta, and Sister Tamiko.
That's right.
And she was speaking about how she would drop her daughter off, and if a daughter's late and she don't see her right away, that terror that kind of creeps in because we don't know.
Yeah.
And the sister was sharing with me that she was at a Walmart. And you know how big Walmarts are.
Yes.
And she saw a little girl, couldn't be no more than 2 years old, according to what she was telling me. And she was walking with a lady, and she assumed that was her mother. Mm-hmm. But when the lady went one way and the child went somewhere else, she called out to the lady saying, hey, your daughter's over here. And the lady turned around and said, that's not my daughter. Woo! And so immediately now the general orders come into effect.
That's right.
You got to take charge.
Take charge.
So she went out and grabbed the little girl, brought in the security, ascertained the information, and luckily the mother was in the store. And we have to be more attentive. But she said the thing that struck her the most, how easy it would have been to take that little girl, because the little girl was not afraid. She wasn't crying. She couldn't even talk. She couldn't say her name, but she was fine. If she wanted to lead her out the door, it would have been easy to do that. And then 75,001 would have been missing. So Allah places, there's soldiers in the right place at the right time. So I wanted to bring that point up because we have to, as parents, be more attentive in these places. I mean, the world is full of distractions, and we got to shop, we got to talk on the phone, we got to fill out a job applications all at the same time. But if, you know, a few years ago, they came up with the law to keep the children out of the car because parents would leave them in the car because they didn't want to have to drag them through that big crowd at a Walmart or whatnot. But the temperatures don't allow that. So we used to, if you remember, Brother Andre, would sit in the top part of the pushing cart. You know, that was a big thing. That's where you stick your legs through the little, come on now, the little curve holes there and ride around. Hey, we got to get back to those things or come up with a mechanism. I'm just so glad that our sister was there. Yeah. And there are many more people in the community because this is the village. Right. We are part of the village. So we got to take charge of our posts. We got to be watchful. You know, keeping our eyes open, checking everything out within sight and hearing, because there are predators that are lurking in those parking lots, looking for any advantage. So I want to thank the sister, and I want to again thank Student Minister Anthony Muhammad for allowing us to have this show to bring out that kind of information. Yes, and we see that the information is bearing fruit. Praises be to Allah. And just a caveat. We always use program. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I know what you mean. Yes, sir. But that's to our listening audience. That's for a purpose because there are a lot of shows, and we use that language simply because we just want it to be clear that this is not a show in the traditional sense because our objectives are quite clear. We have to disseminate the kind of information to our community that can benefit them in their spiritual growth and development, and to serve as guidance in the time of great trouble, and that they can put to the employ of their daily lives and goings on. Yes, sir. So sometimes but we have to have the kind of conversations with our community that in a lot of instances are uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. We have to talk about it. It's like today. What must we do? Not what can we do, not what we ought to do, but what must. There are some things that must be done, meaning they are requisite acts. Yes, sir. There are things that we absolutely have to do that are essential if we expect to bring any level of peace and stem the tide of violence and crime amongst our young people in our community. We cannot expect the police to rid us completely of the scourge of violence we see. People are drive-by shooting, driving down the street shooting, walking in broad daylight shooting. I mean, it's ridiculous. So we can't expect local law enforcement, no city can put all of the onus on the local law enforcement agencies. The responsibility, some of it has to be shouldered. In fact, the lion's share of it should be shouldered by the community at large. Yes, sir, that's true. Because to the degree that children are unattended, children are not nurtured, children are not given outlets, communities that don't take responsibility for ensuring the proper growth and development of the youth of their community, to that same degree, those youth or those young people are prone to engage in acts and behaviors that are antisocial and counterproductive and self-destructive. Yes, sir. And we cannot sit around and expect that we can arrest our way out of this problem. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. So this is a kind of conversation that some may seem or view as futile. There's no hope. What's the use in having it? Okay, well, you can think that way. Well, it's not my problem. Well, it may not be right now until you pull up at the light and somebody heave in the view with a gun in your face, talking about get out the car. Now it's your problem. Yeah. So this is what we want to talk about. Once again, the call-in numbers to be a part of that discussion. What must we do? We're asking you. Hopefully you will be a part of the conversation. What is in your mind to the listening audience? What do you think we must do? And you can come up with some things that we should, but I use the word must for a purpose, because like I just said,
there are some things that, just like a parent in a household, there's some things that you got to do to rear your children, meaning rear them, meaning put them behind you, that they should follow you, follow your lead, follow your instructions, and that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to talk about. Once again, the call-in numbers are 901-452-3094 or 901-324-7490. Brother Kenneth, we're going to go ahead and take this commercial break, man, and then we're going to come back with our axioms, and then we'll get at it. So we'll be right back after these commercial messages. What's your source for truth and news reports? Where do you turn for non-corporate driven news that's fair and balanced? Subscribe to the Final Call News, your number one free and independent news source that delivers hard-hitting national and international news coverage of today's political, economic, and social issues. For weekly home delivery or online digital edition, log on to www.finalcall.com or call us, area code 901-286-5034. Get your locally made, freshly baked supreme bean pies from Bake the Bean Pie. Made from the best of ingredients, experience the golden brown, flaky crust and pastry filling of the supreme bean pie from Bake the Bean Pie. Not only delicious, but also nutritious. The supreme bean pie from Bake the Bean Pie. Call in your order today, 901-210-8791. That's 901-210-8791. Bake the Bean Pie. Bake. The Urban Indulgence Bath and Body Boutique. At Urban Indulgence Handmade, we pride ourselves on offering quality skincare at affordable prices. Handmade with plant-based, skin-loving ingredients, our soaps and body butters give you luxurious lather and ultimate moisture. Experience the Urban Indulgence at 3314 Poplar Avenue next to Poplar Plaza. Open Tuesday through Friday, 11 a.m. till 5:30 p.m., Saturdays, 10 a.m. till 4 p.m.
And we're back on here in the S.O.S radio program. Once again, I am your host, Hunter. And we have this, my brother Kenneth. I'm so glad to have him here. Most we want to also, Brother Kenneth, before we get too far in the program, it's been on my mind for the past couple of days. Since yesterday, we got news that one of our great ones, okay, you know,
Yes. You can hear now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. There we go. All right. But we got news that one of our great ones, one of our great pioneers,
Yes, sir.
who was one of the great representatives of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the southern region, Abdul Rahman Muhammad. We called him affectionately the Rock of the South, who did great work in building the foundation upon which we stand today, as one of the helpers of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And not only that, he stood back up by God's grace and permission when the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan awakened and began the second rebuilding effort of the Nation of Islam, and was by his side until he returned to the source from whence he came, a source to which all of us at some point in time will return. And he's known for, and this is a quick history lesson, some may not know, but he is the one who is responsible for Muhammad Ali becoming a member of the Nation of Islam.
Yes, sir.
Posting the historical archive photographs of him putting Ali's boxing gloves on, his Ali's inspiring sessions, but he was known as Captain Sam. He was a captain. And he ultimately was given the name Abdul Rahman Muhammad. Rahman means beneficent. So may Allah be pleased with him. I had the blessing of meeting him on several occasions, talking with him, taking group photographs with him. hearing him speak of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has taught him in the great work, and it is documented in our archives, the great accomplishments, as any nation documents the histories of those who are the foundational soldiers, if you will, the building of their society. So may Allah be pleased with Brother Abdul Rahman Muhammad. Our love and prayers go out to the family and, of course, the friends and extended family, the believing community, and his janazah, that's what we call it in Islam, his funeral will be in Atlanta, Georgia this weekend. So I wanted to go ahead and acknowledge that, man. Yes, sir. You know, you get that phone call. You're so used to seeing somebody. Right. And for those in the audience, when you listen at the minister, he's that voice that you would hear saying, Farrakhan! Yes, sir. Farrakhan! Teach, minister! Farrakhan! Right. That's Abdul Rahman Muhammad. So mighty rock. The mighty rock, brother. And I just pray Allah that I and we turn out to be the kind of helpers that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and this mission needs as we run our leg of the resurrection of the mentally dead and the building of what God would be pleased with on earth. So there you have it, brother. I mean, and I want to keep my tone scale up because I think, you know, your mind starts going through the Rolodex of these precious moments that you have with people, man, that, you know, you see them, yes, from afar, then you get a chance to be right next to them, you know, and then you get an opportunity to be converse with them and hear what it was like, you know, establishing. He's one of the reasons, among many others, of course, that we can comfortably say today, Assalamu alaikum. That's right. That's right. Say, I am a Muslim, because it was difficult and during that time, brother, among black folk, trying to establish what they call Islam. We would call them voodoo cult and some more stuff. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, we take these things for granted because every time you cut on the television, you watch the sports, you hear Muhammad this and Malik this. But back then, you had to fight. Even when sometimes you would watch some documentaries of interviews, and then they would use the name disrespectfully, Elijah Poole, knowing that it's Muhammad, you know, because they were offended that you wanted to be something that they didn't make you. How dare you? Yeah, how dare you change your name to a holy name? You know, they never said that to John Wayne. That wasn't his name. That was his stage name. Right. You know, Rock and Newman, all these other people. You know, Rock Hudson, excuse me. Yeah. All these other people. Those were stage names. Right. You know, but it was all right. That's but right. You want to change your name from Cassius Clay? You know, you gotta be proud of that name. You know, that was one of the great plantation owners we had here. Yes, sir. You know, and in that line, brother, somebody asked me once, a sister asked me this. She said, wow, y'all name Muhammad. And my answer to her was, well, the man who fathered me into, or birthed me into the light of the wisdom of God, I took after the name. And the name, my last name, is not a name that my heritage, that comes out of my heritage. Yes. And I know that for a fact about my former last name. So they didn't get permission to impose these names upon us. So why should we get permission to give them back to them? And some see it as a disrespect. But when you are knowledgeable of history, and it's more specifically your personal history, I know the name I used to have, brother, that was not the name of my ancestors. So that was a name that was imposed upon us. But then my first name, my mother gave that name. So I keep that name. Yes, sir. And I'll keep that name as long as she is here to honor the fact that that's the name that she chose for me. But the last name was not a choice. And if many of us would study our own personal histories and our families, we'll find out that 99.99999% of us who are black in America, the names that most of us wear were not names that we chose. So, hey, I shouldn't have to get permission to give it up. No,
No, sir, you should.
They didn't get permission to give it to me.
That's right. Mr. Muhammad.
Praise is due to Allah. And the X is a holy name too. Because in our heritage, we didn't immediately name our children.
Right.
We waited until they manifested certain character traits, and they were named according to what character traits they manifested. So, you know, we don't come from, I got something flying around in here.
Yeah, I see you working with him, brother.
I'm trying to knock it out there. He gonna come back around and I'm gonna sock it. But anyway, our people weren't just, you know, we put thought into what we did.
Yes.
So that's why. But brother, let's get to this, man. These axioms for today and every day and every program. The Honorable Louis Farrakhan reminds us that he who prescribes the diameter of your knowledge dictates the circumference of your activity. And he also reminds us that a slave is one whose power and authority is ruled over by another, and whose sphere of freedom is limited according to the wishes of his master. Dang, I missed it. And he also, you see, man, this thing is distracting. But lastly and finally, from Carter G. Woodson, he writes in his book, Miseducation of the Negro, when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him to go here or yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You do not have to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there's not a back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary. So there you have the guiding principles that hopefully will undergird the conversation as we go forward into this most important conversation, because crime and violence, man, throughout the country. I mean, we live in an era or in a time where people, you know, violence is, I mean, it's jaw-dropping that a person will arm themselves, you know, and go into a public place, go into a place of worship, and just shoot people up because you don't agree with them. And even more disturbing, among us as a people, in light of what we've had to endure collectively as a people here in this country, to now see the level of disrespect for life that we have one to another. You know, we can be mad about police killings, but the number of black people killed by errant police behavior, or whatever you want to call it, in comparison to the numbers of us taking each other's life, those numbers at the hands of police, man, pale. You know? And the reason, I think that the most, you know, the thing that really tugs at me is the whys of what happens. Why did you shoot him? What were the circumstances under which this violent act was committed? One brother to another, one sister to another, and so on and so forth. So that's what we want to discuss today. And we're asking, you know, what must we do? And what are some of the thoughts of those who would so desire to call and be a part of the conversation? And of course, brother, you know, I get my receipts. And I got some research over here.
Okay, brother.
Some historical precedents of things that were done to stem the tide of violence in similar situations and under similar circumstances in history. So brother Kendrick, man, Grocer, what's on your mind, brother? What do you think about this, Chief?
Well, I think this subject is very necessary. First, Brother Andre. Second, in the black community, you have multi-layers of problems. You know, I don't want to say difficult. There's some serious problems.
Yes, sir. Very serious.
You look at the housing situation. We was in an area where the turnover is great. People sometimes tend to stop off somewhere to get a leg up and then they move on. Mm-hmm. So you don't create relationships in that neighborhood. Also, we use whole neighborhood as pretty much trap houses.
Yeah.
You know, we don't live over here, but this is where we do our dirt. We have over here, we do our drinking, our gambling, our dope dealing, dope using, and we'll take that neighborhood and make it a cesspool, and then we'll leave out. And so the people who are in that neighborhood, they feel like they're under siege. You have young people who don't have anything to do in the summer. We were speaking about that. The reason why you get those spikes in the summer is not just because it gets hot,
Yeah.
But when you're out there, there's nothing to do. Guns are more accessible than Jimmy John sandwiches. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And everybody got one, and you don't give a fool a gun and he don't want to use it.
That's right.
And now he don't have any value in black life because he never seen anything good in it.
Mm-hmm.
You see, he don't feel good about himself,
Mm-hmm.
so he don't feel good about his other self, which is his brother.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a gun. I want to see it do it work, but let me just point and shoot it.
That's right.
You know, and without even knowing the consequences, because on TV you see the shoot 'em up, bang bang, but you don't see that next step.
Right.
You know, on the first 48,
Mm-hmm.
Miss Mason got you in the box.
Yeah.
Now you sitting there, you a stone killer in the street, you weeping like a baby.
Uh-huh.
You know, snot flying, everything. She rubbing you on your back.
Yeah.
And she walk out of the room and say, boom, man, hook 'em up.
Yeah, have to, brother. I got a saying for that, man. You know, I see it firsthand every day. I just saw it, as a matter of fact, yesterday.
Oh yeah.
You know, doing what I have to do professionally. You know, they stone cold. You see them on Facebook. They got their little pistols, you know, and got their money out in the van and whatnot. And they, bold, talk crazy to anybody. But once we bring them in, and the facts are laid on the line in terms of, the investigation, then reality sets in. You're finna lose your freedom, Chief. You're finna go somewhere for a minute. And then you see the childlike response, and I call it melting like butter in a hot skillet. So you see them, and the thing of it is, the reality is, in most instances, brother, somebody has been telling them that the kind of behavior they are engaging in, that a day like this is coming. Either you're going to go away for a long time, or you're going to go to the grave early. But the thing of it is, why some of us believe that message, or messages like it, should be sufficient as a deterrent for young people to refrain from this kind of behavior.
Oh, no, sir.
But no, sir, it's not, because they have no other options, or they have limited choices in terms of what to do with their time and outlets for young people. And the thing of it, Brother Kenneth, we as a community cannot expect church, school, police, and the community organizations, institutions, city services, and that kind of thing. We cannot leave it completely up to them. They buttress and support what comes from the home. That's why people will say to you quickly, all of this starts at home, and they're absolutely right. But we have to look at that in the context of what has happened to the black family. We can't act as though that our family historically has been as healthy as all other families in terms of ethnic groups in this country. We can't dismiss that in the face of the social maladies and ills that continue to plague our community. We are people, and I think we mentioned this last week, brother, when we were quote unquote freed.
Yes.
Weren't no social workers sent out with us to relieve us of the psychic and psychological trauma that we had undergone for the past 310 years prior to being quote unquote freed, and we really were never free. And in the wake of the advance in health science, mental health, the scientists know for a fact that according to epigenetics, as we mentioned last week, that trauma, emotional trauma, can affect people through the generations, and it can be passed on through the genes. So this has to be looked at if we seriously want to address the issues that we will attempt to discuss on this program today and going forward, brother. So again, the call-in number is 901-452-3094 or 324-7490. Of course, 901-324-7490. Brother Kenneth, man, I went to, of course, there's always a historical precedent. Yes, sir. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us, history is best qualified and most attractive to reward our research. Looking at the Facebook feed, thank you all for tuning in. Man, I see a person I grew up with, went to high school with. I hope this person don't mind me shouting out. I'll just say the first name. My sister Denise is on. She's recently an author.
Wow, congratulations.
And yeah, she wrote a book, I Remember When God Showed Up. And those are the kind of people,
Yes, sir.
you know, that you need talking to young girls, you know,
Right.
giving them self-esteem. And I don't mind plugging her like that because I am proud and excited that to see, you know, somebody you grew up with.
Yes,
I've known this sister since we were children now.
Right.
We go way back to elementary school.
Oh, yeah. You're the right one to step it in, bro.
To Zeta Gardens, you know.
Oh, yeah.
We from the hood, brother. We didn't fall down out the suburbs or out the sky, out of heaven. You know, we come up the rough side of the mountain.
Yeah, we climb all kind of the same mountain, right?
God has blessed this sister to climb pretty high.
Yes, sir.
So I don't mind. Once again, Sister Denise King. I'll go ahead and say aloud, plug the book. But she's the author of a book, I Remember When God Showed Up. So anyone that is interested in improving the life outcomes of our young people and disseminating the kind of information that will inspire people to higher heights, then those people should be noted. We shouldn't have to wait on the mainstream,
No, sir.
you know, to give attention to those among our people that are striving for excellence. And I see that as a strive towards excellence. Thank you for tuning in, dear Sister Denise. Big Chuck is on too, man. We got Chuck. Let me slow down. Brother Mark today. My brother, Mark Muhammad, that's one of the officers in the mosque that got you. When he pulled you as a fish out the sea of sin.
Yes, sir.
He put one foot on that head and took that scale, brother, scale your backside. And next thing you know, falling soldier. I will forever love. I'll never forget my brother Mark Muhammad. He's in the Carolinas now. Brother Mark is on. We have Brother Saad, young soldier, is on, tuned in. Sister Maxine is on. And who else is on? We got Brother Dale on, Brother Chuck, as I just mentioned, my sister Denise, Sister Stephanie, Brother Corey, Sister Kimberly, Sister Sandra is on. I'm waving at people. This is who's on Facebook Live. And many, many others. Sister Brenda is on, Sister Willetta. And Sister Willetta, I will definitely get with you, sister. I know what you want. They want to do some advertising on the radio program. And we certainly want to get them in circulation. Brother Terrence and Sister Hazel is on. Thank you all so much. Sister Donna, praises be to Allah. Sister Donna says she's headed over to YouTube so she can see both of her brothers. I can't wait to get Sister Donna back on here. That sister is a powerhouse. She's a powerhouse and she's a columnist. One of the columnists that writes in the Final Call. And of course, we got Sister Cheryl on. Thank you, Sister Cheryl, for tuning in. And Sister Tamara, assalamu alaikum. Sister Tamara, one of our healthcare professionals, she's on. Sister Tanya, and man, there's a lot of people on today, brother.
Yeah, but they heard you was in the house.
Man, they heard us. We were in the house and trying to help our minister, Brother Anthony, man, get this thing going. But as I was saying, history is best qualified and most attractive to reward research. This is why when you go to the doctor, for the first time at least, they give you that question. They're asking you about ailments that's in your family history, because the doctor, when he knows something of what has been ailing you, generationally at least, then it gives him a perspective on what might be the problem or the source of the problem of what's ailing you now. And that history of your medical ailments, along with his prognosis of or assessment of what's got you ill now, will help him to prescribe something to rid you of that sickness or illness or problem in the future. So it is with a societal illness. What happened to us, that has produced the sickness you see today? That with understanding what has happened, and a proper assessment of what's happening now, we can make some decisions that will be effective in ridding us of these societal ills and problems and juvenile delinquency, teen pregnancy, drug abuse, homelessness, a lack of job opportunity, ignorance is the biggest problem among us. I mean, our people, brother, ignorance is a badge now, a badge of honor. Unfortunately, it's really something to hear a young person say, "I'm a savage."
That's the language.
Wow. You what? Man, I'm a savage.
Beast mode.
Yeah. So these, these phrases that we attach to us, that we popularize to describe us, are negative. And I know sometimes we try to give it a positive spin and a positive connotation, and this is not to berate or belittle. It is simply to get us to take a look at, the mindsets that are giving rise to the violence that we see that appears to have no end. We're searching for answers, man. And I think that this kind of conversation is absolutely essential.
But brother, I see you still trying to deal with that fly in there too.
Man, this thing here, this bad boy flying around my head. I hope it don't sting me because it looks like a bee or a wasp or something. So I just sit still. So I can't be worried.
God will protect you.
I ain't like I hadn't been stung before, bro. I got stung out fishing. I felt like something was pinching me. It was in my shirt. I was like, something pinching me. And I started patting my shirt. I felt it was a wasp. Then it really stung me. I was like, wow. But hey, it ain't like I hadn't been stung before, so no big deal.
Brother Andre, in dealing with this subject, and you're laying the base, I know, to drop something as far as historically, black people and doing our sojourn here in America. We know that America has been like a womb for the black man and woman. Yes. And anything that goes on in the womb or around the womb affects that which is inside the womb. Mm-hmm. America has been a violent nation from its inception. Yes. We act like the violence we see in the communities, and we have to deal with it because we're fighting a war on two fronts. Mm-hmm. There's an external war and there's an internal war. We have to deal with both of them because if you're fighting a war militaristically on two fronts, it's very difficult to win.
Yeah, very difficult.
But what I want to say is, America, we get to the root of this problem. How has America solved her problems historically?
That's right.
They never came with diplomacy. They never offered their values and brought it and said, put a clean glass next to a dirty glass, you choose. They have always violently and systematically eliminated what they perceive to be an enemy. Mm-hmm. Now, who are our first teachers? Mm-hmm. We have to deal with it. You can't recognize there's a problem in the 7th grade with a student. You trace it back to see when did you first start showing that you had this problem, right? You see? So America, when they came in contact with the native people who were here, who were indigenous to this nation, the so-called Indians, the Native Americans, how did they handle them?
They handled them as brothers, that's for sure.
There was no talking. They didn't have any conflict resolution centers. No. They saw something, they took it. You disagreed with them, they killed you.
Yeah. They used a system of tricks, but they made a whole lot of treaties, none of which that they honored.
Yes. The point I'm trying to make, I don't want to go through all the history. We know some of it. Again, I want you to get that point across. But when you're dealing with the fruit don't fall far from the tree.
That's right.
The tree that produced the so-called Negro that you see. We're not in our original condition.
That's right.
We have been systematically through a process. It was taken from a people of high civilization and culture and made into a social being that was called a Negro.
That's right.
The known Negro never described an individual, described a condition which means dead.
That's right. That's exactly what it means.
And there was a process of destroying us, turning us upside down, inside out. Mm-hmm. Now, it's easy to point out our flaws, but we always must remember what the root of the problem is. Mm-hmm. And once we expose the root to the light of day, we can kill that tree, and then we can be restored. Because I know, Brother Andre, you got some things that can show that once we set our mind to it and walked into these communities, how we first created the peace, and then we kept the peace.
Right.
But we still have to deal with who broke the peace.
That's right. And I humbly say, brother, what I have is not mine. A man taught me and tapped me on my spiritual shoulder and said, wake up, man. You've been asleep too long.
Yes, sir.
And by God's grace, I awakened, and here I am. And over the years, I have continued to study and put my mind and heart to the examination of what the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches and the teachings of what the Honorable Louis Farrakhan has shared in terms of scripture and its relevance to the time in which we live, and not only biblical but Quranic scripture as well. So the problems we face are definitely solvable. And let me say this too, brother. This conversation and pointing out the fact that black people were set at naught. A lot of people like to characterize that as playing the victim. But what I find interesting about that logic, brother, that black people are the only folks subjected to that. The histories of other people that were set at naught, when they speak of them, they are never accused of having a victim mentality.
That's right.
Okay? And what has happened to other ethnic groups when the Japanese were put in internment camps, what happened to Jewish people? Well, some type of redress was given that group. In other words, there was some level of compensation to try to correct. And when I say compensation, I'm not speaking specifically and exclusively about money.
That's right.
Because what happened to us is quite different. Because not only were we physically abused, murdered, but we were mentally destroyed.
Yes, sir.
I mean, when you talk about removing any remembrance from a people of who they formerly were, there's a scripture. It's in the 83rd Psalm. It says, "Keep not silent, O God, hold not thy peace. For those that hate thee have lifted their head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy hidden ones. They make a tumult and have said, Come, let us cut them off from being a people, from being a nation, that Israel will be no more in remembrance." So we understand that, as the Honorable Louis Farrakhan has taught us, this is a reference to what would happen to a specific people as it relates to them being brought under the assault of someone whose objective was to cut them off.
Yes, sir.
From their people,
right.
That they don't be a nation, and to the point to who they once were is no longer even in their remembrance. So that's the condition. No other people have suffered that but black folks in America.
Yes, brother, that's serious.
No, and this is not, as I was saying, this is not to absolve our young people of their responsibility for the choices they make. No. This is not to absolve. If you go out here and carjack and rob, bro, you got to pay a price. You've been warned. There's something about human nature that you don't have to teach. You know, that you don't pull up to somebody and demand their car, and if they resist, you blow their head off.
That's right.
The reason I know there's something innate in the nature of us that teaches us that, because as soon as you commit the act, you immediately scurry away trying to run and hide and not be caught or identified, because you know the act that you just committed is wrong.
Yes, sir.
The thing of it is, we've been so desensitized that we don't even, like you said earlier, Brother Kenneth, we don't think about the aftermath or the consequences that come with the behavior, especially our young people. They just don't. And I have been witness to that. Yes, sir. So, you know, but some of this research I got, brother, I went and looked at the gangs of early America. Because, I mean, when you talk about violence in our community, the first thing that really comes to mind is the little street organizations, you know. But there was a time in America, early America, that America had a criminal underworld or gang problem, or organized crime problem, but it was called gangs. You had gangs like the 5 Points, you know. You had Irish gangs, Italian gangs. You had Jewish gang called the Purple Gang, which was really one of the progenitors, if you will, of that kind of life. Started in Detroit, and because of Detroit's proximity to Canada in the Prohibition era, that situated them close enough to a legal alcohol and the ease of bringing it into the country.
Yes, sir.
And the predominance of the members of the Purple Gang, their membership was predominantly Jewish. Not exclusively, but predominantly, according to the historians that write about it. I mean, something as simple as Wikipedia say basically the same thing, but I don't rely exclusively on them, you know, because people can go in there. We don't like wiki scholars.
Right.
Some of it is good, but it's always best to go to those who have done extensive research and have written books that you read regarding it. But there are several writers that bear witness that the epicenter of prohibition of the movement of liquor into America at the time it was illegal was in Detroit. And they write that the most prominent gang was the Purple Gang. They controlled most of the bootlegging and the narcotics trade, and their most frequent customers were poor people, and more specifically, black folks. And I think it's interesting they mentioned in the history, brother, that in 1930, one of their significant leaders in the gang died of the pneumonia all of a sudden, unexpectedly, they say. And war broke out amongst the criminal factions. And I thought about 1930. That's interesting. It happened in 1930.
Very interesting.
Because somebody made himself known in 1930 in Black Bottom, Detroit. And guess where the headquarters, when the gang split, one of the sects, guess where they were headquartered at, brother?
Where, brother?
They were headquartered in Hamtramck. Hamtramck. Yeah, that's part of,
okay.
That's where the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was working to lift black people out of these social ills that they were selling to us at the time. But just a tidbit on that, but I looked at how did America solve her gang problem during the Prohibition era. You're talking about early 1900s up to around 1940. The Progressive era, the New Deal, you're talking about Roosevelt, President Taft, and who was the third one? There was three presidents during that era, but I know one of them was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Hold on. I watched a clip on it. Somebody did a documentary. They mentioned the presidents, and I tried to remember them. I should have wrote them down. But at any rate, the gang problem, according to Miss Gabrielle Williams, she writes about gangs in the Progressive era. This is a work of hers from 2014. She writes, crime drastically increased during the Progressive era. It was the abundance of people along with prohibition that caused a sharp rise in illegal activity. Prohibition meaning they outlawed something that people really was in high demand. That was alcohol. Yes. They had speakeasies and all of that, you know. So as I'm reading this to the listening audience, listen to this in the context of what you see with crack cocaine and marijuana that they're trying to legalize all over the place now. After they spend all this time locking black folks up on it, now all of a sudden it's almost exclusively white people getting rich off of it.
Without getting redressed.
Right. Without getting redressed to the ones that you locked up and that are still in jail on this. So, I mean, but anyway, let me share some of this history from Ms. Gabrielle Williams. But there was a significant surge in crime. It was the Progressive era that shoved seemingly insignificant people like Al Capone and the little-known gangs such as the Five Points Gang, as well as the Purple Gang, into infamy. The Five Points Gang of New York City, New York, were a notorious group of criminals, according to her. There are many reasons that people join gangs. Now, listen to the reason that, the people we're referring to here are not black folks.
Exactly.
You know, we were not even a consideration for the most part at this time in history. You know, the problem of gang culture and underworld culture and criminal syndicates, that was a white problem that they were trying to solve amongst themselves. But I found it interesting that according to Ms. Williams, the reasons that people join gangs, she says safety and the need to belong are two of them. She says, although there are a couple of reasons individuals may choose to become a member of a gang, there are many factors that go into the actual formation of a gang. It's interesting. Many factors that go into the formation of a gang. So they don't just pop up. So if there were many factors then that gave rise to gangs of that era, what are the factors that gave rise and give rise to gangs among our people today? Good question. That's my brother calling me. He may not realize that I'm broadcasting live. I might need to take that because that ain't just no anybody. To my Facebook Live audience, he calls back. I'm going to take that call, Brother Kenneth. Yes, I'm ask that you take up on the commentary. But what are the factors, as you see it, Brother Kenneth? What are some of them? That, I mean, because they list factors. Well, she said there are many factors that goes into the formation. They don't just pop up.
Well, some of the things that will cause people to come together in a group would be a crisis. Say you're living in a neighborhood, there's a crisis that you have to defend yourselves from. And you will have to band together because individually you're weak if you're being set upon by an organized group. Let's say, for instance, a military force back during the American Revolution. It could be the police. It could be someone coming in from outside your neighborhood, and you're by yourself. But together, when that community comes together, usually the youth, there's strength in that. It could be a loss of family structure, right? You know, because there's a sense of belonging that we all need. We're social beings, and we want to be part of a group. You know, whether it's a family unit, a church, a civic group, what you would call a street organization or a gang, but that individual's family. You see, some do it, say security, a sense of brotherhood, and there's also economic factors that could come into play. You see, and all of those things are, one thing by itself may not necessitate coming together in a group, but all of those things coalescing at the same time we tend to push people together. Right. You got a common enemy. So, hey, we come together, we can deal with this common enemy.
And I find it interesting, Brother Saint, because I wanted to just ask you off the cuff, because we're not looking at one another. We're in two different rooms. I know we're on the same screen.
Yes.
But I'm in the control room while my brother Kenneth is in the actual studio where the guests sit. Because, I mean, I have to run the control board. But anyway, he's not looking at what I'm looking at, because according to the history on the west coast of Los Angeles, they said prior to the 1940s, there were many black and Latino clubs and cliques, but very few were outright gangs. I know some may have seen the movie Brooklyn, where you talk about Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, who a man named Frank Lucas was part of that, but they called him Brooklyn. They made a movie, But at any rate, but if you look at the movie, the black criminal underworld was subordinate, in the worst kind of way, to the bigger white, well-organized, more funded gangs.
Yes.
So it's kind of like the black gangs or whatever that existed, ran around and got the scraps, In other words, they just made trouble on a very local or small level. But in this, brother, on the West Coast, there were white gangs. One of them was called the Spook Hunters.
Spook Hunters?
Yeah. There was a gang in Los Angeles says, however, this changed in the 1940s. In the 1940s, the black population doubled as people came to work building ships and weapons for the military during World War II. You know, black people were trying to migrate west and north out of the South. Anywhere but the South. Because the South was, a lot of my family is in Detroit and Chicago right now.
Yes, sir.
You know, we migrated about this piece because, you know, the South had a certain stigma to it, you know, for black people in terms of our experiences. But at the time, blacks and Latinos were restricted in where they could live. Blacks had to live along Central Avenue, and Latinos lived mostly in East LA. As the population increased, some whites feared that blacks and Latinos would start living outside of these restricted areas. Now, the interesting thing about this, as I read further about this, is Huntington Park, Bell, Southgate, Inglewood, Compton, Gardena, and West LA all had organized white gangs that would seek out blacks and Latinos and harass them or beat them up. The largest of these gangs were the spook hunters. Spook was a derogatory term towards black people. During the 1940s, Ku Klux Klan also emerged in LA. The first black and Latino gangs were in response to these white gangs.
Wow.
The first ones. So protection,
Yes, sir.
was one of the first catalysts that started this. Just as when white immigrants came here, the Italians and the Irish and the Jews, they weren't all just one lovely family getting along. No, they had cultural differences. So they congregated amongst one another. Opportunities were few and far in between. So for protection, for upward mobility, for a sense of belonging, to feed their families, they got involved in criminal behavior and gangs. So likewise, when you read this, you know, black people experience something very similar, if not the exact same thing. So what we're getting at is we want to look at the roots of this thing. It's kind of like a pathological approach to looking at the illness and trace it back to its roots, all the way up to what you see now, that we may understand how to uproot it.
Yes, sir.
You know, because most young people, and I've talked with young brothers about this before, they never heard spook hunters. Who is that? You realize
They don't talk about
they don't talk about that.
Even though it's documented. It's not talked about. Many people are under the impression that all the mobsters were Italian. It's just not true.
No.
Because they don't highlight certain aspects of it, you know, for a lot of reasons.
Right.
You know, but the spook hunters, I think we were the first ones to bring to the public light this purple gang in Detroit and the things that they were doing. And what you mentioned, New York with Ellis Island and the European immigrants coming over here, and all of them had cultural differences. That's where the 5 points originated. So you had the Irish that were there, and they had their cultural differences with the Italians, with the Jewish ones. Everybody had their own problems, but they ended up working them out down the line. You see, when you spoke about prohibition, many people don't know that they tried to legislate morality. Those presidents that you were speaking of, I think you had Coolidge, Hoover, FDR, right? Then you had Truman and Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes, sir.
In that succession. And again, they began to put money out into the economy, into the American public. You know, with all these things that FDR did with the New Deal, he just started making up jobs to give people, because when people have money, then they spend it. That's good for the economy. I think George W. Bush did it at one time. He gave everybody a rebate check. I can't remember what year. Because once we get money, the first thing we're gonna do is go out shopping. You know, that's how we've been taught to handle money. You know, there are those who get it and save it, and this is the flaw in the Reaganomics that they don't speak about. I think the economist was named Slafford. He was speaking that the one thing, it would work in theory, but the thing they could not figure out is the morality of the individual that's applying it. because the rebates they get, the tax break they get, instead of passing it on to the employees, they just buy back the shares of stock that they sold previously, and so it does the economy no good, and this is why the wealth gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But back to the prohibition, it was a Jewish man by the name of Arnold Rothstein. He's really the godfather of that particular area. He had an understudy by the name of Meyer Lasky, who had a childhood friend named Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. And they grew up in New York, and they were understudies. Arnold Rothstein's claim to fame is not the prohibition, but he actually rigged the World Series. When you hear about Shoeless Joe Jackson, all those guys, he's the one that bought that. You can study that. It'll come out in different books, but it's not talked about a lot. Now, during that particular time in New York with Meyer Lasky and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, on the Italian side, you had Charles Lucky Luciano, and his running mate was a guy by the name of Frank Costello. Now, these individuals, when they came together, they formed a bond because they had a common enemy. The boss at that particular time, Big Joe, and he was running things with an iron hand. And so there was a lot of wars going up. So after they fought the wars and fought for power, this is where the origin of what they call the commission came about. Where you had the 5 points, it matured into the 5 families. You had the Genovese family, the Lucchese family, the Colombo family, the Gambino family, and the Bonanno family. And all of these had the different structures and different organizations, but they came together collectively to take over what we would call the underworld. And then it just started migrating throughout the United States. Detroit was one of their strongholds. We know Chicago was because they formed what's known as the outfit. We call it the syndicate, but they call it the outfit. With Alfonso Scarface Capone, he studied under Joe Torre. They chopped up the city. You had Jaime Weiss back then. And all those big mobsters that you read about, Bugs Moran. This is real action that's going on. Drive-by shooting. They want to act like the Bloods and the Crips started it.
Oh man, St. Valentine's Day Massacre was a drive-by shooting.
They ride by with them Tommy guns.
That happened in the area where the Purple Gang was, man.
So but again, when we adapt the worst part of their culture, they had really authors of it. America, as you have said, brother, has always had a game problem.
Yeah. So if this didn't start, and the point we're wanting to get to, me mentioning this history, is what did they do to solve their problem with crime? Because there was a lot of corruption in government. Because, the speakeasies, the Prohibition era, it backfired in words.
Yes.
In their attempt to keep the society free of what is really a scourge of the drug alcohol, it just made people figure out a way to get it. And it became something in high demand. And it got to the point where public officials going to speakeasies and getting drunk, police going, mayors and, government officials. So naturally, you're a crime boss. Hey, man, the mayor in there. Go ahead and take a picture of him. He's compromised. He's compromised. So now, but at any rate, it got to the point to where many of the local officials were in the pocket of these underworld criminals. But that's the history of it. But the thing of it is, like I just said, what did they do to solve the problem? They started a new deal. But I want to highlight something that some may know this name, Claiborne Boone Sloan, out of Los Angeles. They was teaching this brother the history, and he made this comment. He said, he said, the history, man, the history. I got a little obsessed with the history. The guys before me, that's in their 50s and 60s, weren't even allowed to go in the city. That just blew me away. Well, here in Memphis, that was a time when you couldn't go downtown to the Malco Theater.
That's right, brother.
We were not allowed to go there. But at any rate, this making some parallels. They said, we would get together 10, 15, 20 of us sometimes just to go to the movies in Inglewood so we won't be attacked or slaughtered by the spook hunters. And I'm going, spook hunters? Who are they? So many of our young people knew nothing about the spook hunters,
Right.
and still don't. But this was a gang in the early stages, the seminal stages of the formulation of gangs in Los Angeles was in response to young black people being accosted by white gangs.
Yes.
So, and this is a part of the history of how how this started, if you will, and of course, you couple that with lack of opportunity, because a lot of the gangs, some of the gangs, many of the gangs, I can't say many of them, due to lack of opportunity and lack of resources and outlets, some of them, like the conservative vice lords, at their inception, started to help bring opportunity to the community. Those of you in the listening audience, have you ever seen a picture of Dr. King shooting pool on a pool table? He's got a cue stick in his hand around his back, and he's in a pool hall. Well, most of you may not know, but that pool hall he's in, that's the vice lord's pool hall. That was the conservative vice lord's pool hall. In other words, like the Panther Party, there were black, quote unquote, gang members trying to do, quote unquote, good in the hood, create havens where we could congregate, because there were places where black people just weren't allowed to go. I mean, even to this day, places like Forsyth County, Georgia. I mean, Oprah Winfrey did a show on, she just couldn't believe that there were still sundown towns in existence in America.
Yeah, tell them what a sundown town is.
A sundown town, brothers, one of those towns predominantly populated by whites who didn't want blacks in their town after sundown. So they said, get out of town before sundown. That's what a sundown town was and is, because to some measure they do still exist. But at any rate, that's some of the backdrop of what gave rise to, quote unquote, the gangs. And first it was protection, to provide opportunity. The Panther Party started a free lunch program. But, in the absence of discipline, in the absence of moral standards that are enforced, when crime is introduced, or the opportunity to make illicit money from illicit activity, that becomes real attractive in the face of the lack of opportunity. So, I mean, you working a job, you got a good job. But some dude come to you and tell you, look, man, if you just spend 30 minutes with me, you'll make more money in 30 minutes than you will make in the next 30 days. If you just come with me for 5 minutes, all I need you to do is take this package from here to there. That's all I need you to do for me. So here's a man trying to feed a family. Like, well, damn, all I got to do is, excuse me, I should have said that. I didn't mean to let the D word slip out, All I got to do is take this from here to there.
Yes, sir.
And it happens. He like, ooh, we can eat good this week or this month.
Sir.
So, those kinds of things.
That's real.
Yeah.
Well, that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, we were speaking on the conservative vice lords. Now, when the CVL first started, they were actually writing Springfield, Illinois, that's where the capital is, getting grants for the community where they can establish breakfast program, lunch program, after school program. They were cleaning up the streets or whatnot. But again, when that kind of money that comes in from the illicit trade, guns or drugs or whatever it may be, you have to decide, am I going to be a freedom fighter or I'm going to be make this money? Mm-hmm. And see, that's a very hard pill to swallow. And money, when you don't have it, then there's a sense of desperation or a sense of need. You're able to be drawn out. Well, you say, well, they should have resisted. Well, here in Tennessee, I was speaking about a brother, and I was telling them some of the heyday of the black politicians here during the era when the Forge was ruling, and you had Mayor Harrington, and all of those things that they set upon our public officials. They called it the Tennessee Waltz. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And they basically entrapped them to a certain degree, you know. And they always say you can't con an honest man because honest man not looking for something.
Right.
But when you see your colleagues who have been doing this type of thing for years,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they call it kicks back. That's all it is.
Yes.
But when our politicians, you know, they got caught up in that, you know, oh man, it was all over every news channel.
Yes, sir.
And it made black people lose respect to a degree for our public officials.
Yes, sir.
Even though we know this type of behavior goes on all the time.
Yes, sir.
And just like with the underworld, you were saying most of the things we ran was, you know, I won't say harmless, but they weren't violent to speakeasy. It was just clubs like the Cotton Club.
Yes.
We would go dance, party, you can go in there and drink, have a good time, go home. What they call things that your priest or preacher may not approve of, but they was what the police call harmless vices. I'm the number game. You know, the first job I had, Brother Andre, I'm going to say this, I would get the little slips and take to the number house. You know, actually said, why is the lottery legal? It wasn't always a lottery, especially in the South. We played, being from Michigan, we played numbers. You know, you could put a penny, nickel, dime, whatever. You could play a straight box combination. You know, you get those little slips, you put the little card in there. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir.
I would go around the neighborhood, pick them up, take them to the spot. You know, get a little money for, you know, go buy some cookies or whatever. Yeah. You know, because we're gonna stop a little kid on a bike. You know what I'm saying? But that was what my thing was, and that went on in the neighborhood, harmless vices. And in the movie Hoodlum, you saw where Bumpy Johnson and them, they were in Harlem. They were just doing the numbers.
Yeah. They started Malcolm X.
Yeah, until you start. Then you saw West End Indian Archie.
Archie playing the numbers.
Yeah, no paper, Red.
No paper. Put it all right here.
Yeah, but the thing I'm saying is when the big crime bosses, you know, it was Dutch Schultz down there, and then everybody else got a wind of the kind of money that they was making. Now
they want to play with us.
Yeah, now they come with the muscle.
Niggas making that kind of money?
Yeah, that's what it was. And you heard
some of that action.
If you remember the movie, the guy that was playing Dutch Schultz told me, he said, look, man, I told y'all this, man, months ago. You know, y'all say y'all wasn't interested in these little pennies and nickels. Now all of a sudden y'all see how much money they making, hundreds of thousands of dollars back in the 30s a week, you know, because everybody, you know, why does the Powerball get to be so big? Because we are looking for that, man, one thing that's going to
and this thing, and you know, bro, I got to read something my sister Donna just posted.
Yes, sir.
She asked me, she said, brother, she said, check out the final call in our story when Bennett Lee of the Vice Lords. And she's also said Stone Mountain, Georgia was said to be a sundown site when she was growing up. Okay. And Sister Donna. And she's also said when Bennett Lee came to Memphis, he talked about how they became a light of the community and then how it got turned around. So I just wanted to cite that from my Sister Donna. And this is kind of like the backdrop, you know, or the prologue, or, you know, these things didn't just happen in a vacuum. Now, one thing that's interesting about the old gangs, going back to, because I'm looking at some things about Stan Tookie Williams and how all of that got started, but I want to shift back to this progressive movement, because the problems that they were having with their gangs, Brother Kenneth, man, it's 25 minutes after 6 o'clock already. Really? But they said poor living conditions also contributed greatly to the rise in gangs during the progressive era, because more and more people were moving to the cities and the country as a whole. Living conditions in large cities declined. People who immigrated from other countries often had little money. Okay? This meant that they were forced to live in poor areas with bad conditions. One reason for the formation of gangs is lack of money. selling drugs, and engaging in gambling meant profit for those living in poor areas. So correlate that to what you see today. When you see the quote unquote young gang member, you see him on the internet, you see him on Facebook, even in the hip hop community. It's about money. You see them, they make a fan with $100 bills. I saw my man Kodak Black. He just gotten out of some trouble. Yes. But he come walking out of, jail with money, $100 bills up in a fan, hiding his face from the camera. But even our youngsters, we see 14, 15, 13, 12-year-old children, brother.
Yes.
They got pistols. They point their pistols on their Facebook page. Then they got their money out of the thing. And so these are, and really, brother, the truth is these are young children that are under living conditions. I'm telling you what I see with my own eyes. When you go and visit, not visit, but you end up having to go to their house for a particular reason, looking for them for something.
Yes, sir.
You go in the house, it's in complete disarray. Complete. A child oftentimes answers the door. Brother, when I was growing up, you didn't answer no door in my house.
No, sir.
One of my oldest brothers, or mom, or my mother, or my father, when I was with him, he opened the door. He don't answer the door. But go in the hood nowadays. I mean, little babies will answer the door, and they'll holler back, "Mom, somebody at the door." You know what I'm saying?
I do.
But when you go to these communities, man, I mean, some of the conditions that I have seen, but I'm talking about in 2019, are terrible. I mean, really, really bad. It's almost like a caveman kind of living. Because some of our people, brother, they live with these big pit bulls in the house. And they got a room. And they got a doggy fence the room off. And you peek over in there and you see dog feces all on the floor. In the house. In the apartment.
Inside the house.
Yes, sir. And then you got small children growing up in this kind of environment, man. So, it desensitizing that pool, no food in the refrigerator, DHS, lack of opportunity. Now, I mean, this is so prevalent, brother. You got these sisters, they got several children by different men, and I mean, it's I find it hard to find the words because the words that I want to use are the raw words. But I don't want to sound so bad. But brother, the circumstances under which many of our young people are growing up today, I couldn't even imagine, man, being 15, 14 years old and having to navigate my way through a situation where my caregiver is a crackhead. I mean, really. Because crack didn't exist when I was there. When I was 14. No such thing as that.
No, sir.
But you got little children, man, have to deal with a mom or a violent caregiver. And they're taking heroin, crack, and all of this stuff. And then they got to get up and go to school and function as a student. So, I mean, it's...
Yes, sir, brother. That was heavy. And I'm glad you gave it from a first-hand experience because sometimes we minimize the effect of what our young people have to deal with. I think we had the sister on, and she was dealing with early childhood development.
Right.
And she used the term scaffolding. And, you have to build up to certain things. You learn your ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, then you do simple addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Then you progress into things like algebra and solving, linear equations. But our children nowadays, man, they hitting calculus right out the gate. And seeing those things, they don't have the tools to deal with it. And when you speaking about the economic or living in want, I just thought about, when we say peace, what are we really saying? Islam, we say, is peace, so they're offering of peace. But we've learned from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan there can be no peace without security.
That's right.
And when you have that, it's been made secure, then you can have peace.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have this level of insecurity that you're describing,
Mm-hmm.
Brother Andre, then how can you have peace? This doesn't foster peace. It fosters the opposite of peace.
That's right.
This level of despair, then you have the anger and resentment that sits up in it. I mean, we know when a person is heavily addicted to whatever it is and they don't have the money, they trade services. You know what I mean? They trade services for the goods. Whether they provide the service themselves or maybe their child.
Brother, I've seen it.
This is real.
We've had to call, brother, the Department of Human Services into these kinds of situations. I mean, brothers and sisters, listening audience, we are totally unaware, to a large degree, to what these young people today are facing. A lot of these young people are runaways. Go to juvenile court. Just go on the local crime and look at how many runaway reports, how many children are runaways. They're just, and they're living with one another. They're squatting in partially vacant apartment complexes. I'm talking about 10, 12, and 13, 14, just juveniles. Just living in an abandoned home, abandoned house, an abandoned apartment, vacant apartment. This kind of thing is going on. And they're out here in survival mode while we think that it's just, they just want to be this way. They're just bad. They're just not altogether true. There are some social things that's giving rise. Now, let me read something else from the Prohibition era. This article continues. It says, natural-born citizens and immigrants alike were desperate to get enough money to feed themselves and their families. This made the formation of gangs inevitable. Also, being able to feel and possess power was an important factor in the construction of gangs. We're talking about white Italians. These were the factors, according to this author, this scholar. She said the poor often had to see the wealthy citizens within or with much more than they had looking down on them. The idea that they could have power and be able to gain money at the same time was an appealing component, meaning component of joining the gangs. It says perhaps one of the biggest factors in the boom of gang activity was prohibition. So now, there's still a prohibition on marijuana in certain parts of the country.
Yes, sir.
While in other areas, people are getting rich. It's on the stock market. They got grow farms.
Oh, yeah.
They got grow farms. So it's easy for us to say, well, we know it's legal over there, but it ain't legal here. So you're going to jail. I understand. I get it. But the people are thinking, I got this, look, this loud. That's what they call weed now. They call it loud.
I wonder why it's so loud.
We don't got weed no more. It is, but it's got some stuff in it that ain't natural. That's why it's so loud. You smell it a whole 2 or 3 city blocks away, man.
It's in your clothes. You ever go to a store and you walk by young people and you be like, man,
woo! You got to be high just walking by him.
Oh my goodness.
It is absolutely pungent, the odor of marijuana nowadays, which tells you, that it's been manipulated. But to live today, brother, knowing that in certain areas of this country, people are making money hand over fist with grow farms and medical marijuana, and they, and the thing of it, when you look at the racial disparity, some blacks are trying to get in on, the windfall.
Yes, sir.
but they're finding it difficult.
They're blocking that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You can't get in like they can get in.
But they can get in.
Right.
Look, fella, don't take our word for it. You go and check. These white growers can get in, boom, you know. But the little brother in the hood, he's still getting locked up, you know, or getting a misdemeanor citation or whatever for possession of a dime bag.
Yeah.
You know, and the kind of violence that comes with it. I see my brother from West Memphis is on, Brother Albert, and there's some violence going on over there, brother, and gangs. We have to understand these social maladies. That's why the work, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning him, that the mayor of West Memphis is attempting. He's trying to make something available for the young people there. And the citizens need to awaken. The black community needs to awaken to that responsibility and to that call to action.
That's what it is, bro. It's a call.
It's a call to action, man, to make opportunities and outlets for our young people other than just gathering at a club somewhere.
That's it.
You know, and that's what our young people are doing. So, but there's a lot more I got, brother. It's about 6:30, almost 20 minutes till.
That time been jumping tonight.
But that time goes quick, doesn't it?
Been jumping.
And check this out, brother. Listen at what Miss Williams writes towards the end of her article. She said, when she said the biggest boom in gang activity was prohibition, she said when alcohol was outlawed, the need for it by the people of America shot up. The only way to get it was by illegal means. This is where gangs came in handy. Even mayors and police chiefs of cities were seen drinking alcohol illegally in speakeasies. The high demand for alcoholic beverages created more competition between the gangs. Now, I'm gonna play something. I think I have it loaded. Let me make sure I got it. Yeah. Because see now, brother, doctors are being arrested. Have you seen that in the news recently?
Oh, no, sir. I missed that.
For prescribing these opioid pills.
Yes, now that story, yes, I have.
People are being locked up. Yeah.
Wonder why all of a sudden.
It's an opioid crisis. And it's a public health crisis.
Yeah. Yet.
You know, because it's a drug of choice predominantly for white people. Let's just call it what it is. It's facts. Let's not hide behind it. But I want you to listen at something that one legislator had to say about that. So take a listen to this real quick. It's only about 3 minutes, right at 4 minutes long. So just listen at this.
Finally tonight, a NewsHour essay. As we reported earlier, President Obama today announced plans to expand drug treatment centers and increase the use of drugs that reverse the effect of opioids like heroin, OxyContin, and Percocet. Communities across the country are developing new approaches to this epidemic in an attempt to support addicts, helping them into treatment instead of arrests. New York's Cardozo Law School professor Ekau Yanka compares today's approach to heroin users to the tough-on-crime response a few decades ago to those using crack cocaine.
That Kroger, the Midwestern grocery chain, has decided to make the heroin overdose drug naloxone available without a prescription is a sign of how ominous the current epidemic has grown. Faced with a rising wave of addiction, misery, crime, and death, our nation has linked arms to save souls. Senators and CEOs, Midwestern pharmacies, and even tough-on-crime Republican presidential candidates now speak with moving compassion about the real people crippled by addiction. It wasn't always this way. 30 years ago, America was facing a similar wave of addiction, death, and crime, and the response could not have been more different. Television brought us endless images of thin, black, ravaged bodies, always with desperate, dried lips. We learned the words, crack baby. Back then, when addiction was a black problem, there was no wave of national compassion. Instead, we were warned of super predators, young, faceless black men wearing bandanas and sagging jeans. No matter how far from our lives crack was, or guilty by association. By the time I was in college in the early 1990s, my short dreadlocks meant older women would cross the street to avoid me. African Americans were cast as pathological. Their plight was evidence of collective moral failure, of welfare mothers and rock-slinging thugs, and a reason to cut off all help. Blacks would just have to pull themselves out of the crack epidemic. Until then, the only answer lay in cordoning off the wreckage of militarized policing. Today, police chiefs facing heroin addiction are responding not by invoking war, but by trying to save lives and get people into rehab. Suddenly, crime is understood as a sign of underlying addiction rather than a scourge to be eradicated. One former narcotics officer said, "These are people. They have a purpose in life, and we can't look at it any other way." But he couldn't quite put his finger on just what had changed. His words reflect our collective self-denial. It's hard to describe how bittersweet many African Americans feel witnessing this. Glad to be rid of a failed war on drugs? Yes. But also weary and embittered. When the faces of addiction had dark skin, the police didn't see sons and daughters, sisters and brothers. They saw brothers, young thugs to be locked up, not people with a purpose in life. No one laments the violence the crack bombs set off more than African Americans. But how we respond to the crimes accompanying addiction depends on how much we care about those affected. White heroin addicts get overdose treatment, rehabilitation, and reincorporation. Black drug users got jail cells. Just say no. It would be perverse to want to go back, and this is not just about racial guilt. The hope is that we really can learn from our meanest moments. This stark moment gives us the opportunity to quit our dedication to ignoring racism. Next time we, or even you, are faced with an indictment of institutionalized racism, maybe we can swallow the knee-jerk dismissal or the condescending finger-wagging and imagine if you would accept such treatment of your own. We don't have to wait until a problem has a white face to answer with humanity.
Now, that was some heavy commentary, because the reality is the response is markedly different with the opioid crisis, and it still is, because crack addiction is still a problem.
Yes, sir, it is.
And how is it still being handled?
Yeah, they're trying to incarcerate them their way out of the problem.
And so the crackhead still goes to prison, but the opium and the heroin addict, no, they go to rehab. So for them to say that it's a matter of funding, it's an economic problem, to treat it would exacerbate things economically to treat it as a crime problem. That's a bunch of BS, if you ask me. No, it's the skin tone of the problem is different. And that's just the truth. Because, I mean, brother, and once again, and I'm highlighting this, the only reason I'm really highlighting this, Brother Kenneth, is because they are responding to the problem of gangs the same way that they are responding to the problem of crack addiction.
Yes, sir.
But they're responding to the opioid addiction amongst them the same way they responded to the gang problem among them. They reached out. They made opportunities available. They came up with a new deal. That's where I'm going to.
Yes, sir, brother.
And many of the Irish gang members, some of them became firemen and police.
Brother, it's in the history, but again, without the supreme wisdom that we're taught, because we're able to look at things with a critical eye, and we can start seeing it, because you can use laws and policy, and this is where the term institutionalized racism comes from, to affect a particular community the way you want to affect it. Because even during the structure of the modern commission, you know, the Irish, most of them became policemen. You know, you ever heard the term a paddy wagon? You know, that's an Irish term. It comes from the paddy. The paddy. Yeah, you see? And so they handle that aspect of it. But in our community, when we have the same problem, it's not handled. With Richard M. Nixon, he used the term law and order. That's a dog whistle for I'm gonna be hard on these black folks.
And he admitted it.
Yeah.
One of his administration members admitted it.
Then you came with doing the Clinton era, tough on crime.
Tough on
That's
crime.
dog
3 strikes.
Yes. Yes.
So it's baseball now.
Now here it is. Here it is with the Trump administration. Make America great again. That's dog whistle.
Mm-hmm.
See, but we're oblivious to this because we're so caught up. One, we're distracted, and two, we just finding anything and everything to kind of mask the pain that we have to deal with. When you speak about the Irishman, here's an Irishman that is well known, but you don't attach the criminal past to him, and that's the Kennedys. I asked the question, how did the Kennedys get wealthy?
Sister Donna mentioned that. I was going to mention it.
Well, she tuned into because I can't see what you got.
That's right.
Now, when you understand Joe Kennedy, he made his money with the Giancana crime family out of Chicago, where they ran molasses and rum through Canada.
Yep.
And then once Prohibition was over, the wealth that he accumulated, he cleaned himself up, his reputation, by becoming an ambassador to Ireland, and then putting his children, his sons, in certain particular things, college, but also the military, because he wanted to start building up this American identity, because he had in his mind he was going to set up a dynasty. And circumstances came into play where he broke it up. Well, you would have had about 5 Kennedys sitting in the White House at 4 to 8 years apiece. Now, that's what you call a dynasty.
Yes, sir. So they get to turn over their illicit gains.
With no RICO for them.
No, with no RICO.
How much money Frank Lucas get to keep?
None.
How much money did
Robert Johnson, Nicky Barnes, and all of them brothers? No.
Got to give it all up.
They gave it all up. Yes. All of their funds. The fruits of the crime were seized.
Yes, give me all of that.
And this is not to our listening audience. This is not to absolve them. We're just highlighting the double standard. And what we're really leading to is this. We're going to have to help ourselves.
Yes.
The benevolent politician is not coming.
Save ourselves.
That's why we call it S.O.S, saving ourselves. And this is why Student Minister Anthony Muhammad is poising himself, and us along with him. We're going to be getting out into the community soon. In earnest. We got to go out. If we go by ourselves, so be it.
So be it.
Because the thing of it is this. We won't be able to say that the opportunity was not given us to hear the truth.
Yes, sir.
As bitter as it is, and it's bitter. The reality of our condition, brothers and sisters, in our communities can make a brass monkey cry. I'm telling you, straight up. I have gone into houses and came out shook up that our people and young babies are living under those kinds of conditions. I mean, really, I'm serious. I mean, just catch me off the air and we can have some real personal conversations and I can give you some details about living conditions. When we don suits and bow ties and go knock on doors, I'm telling you, brothers and sisters. And the thing of it, children are coming up in these dysfunctional environments, yet they are expected to be normal when nothing about their life is normal. Nothing about it.
Wow.
The violence that they witness as little children, nothing is normal. But there's no wave of compassion. There's no reaching out.
That's the main thing.
Yeah,
we don't feel for them.
We don't feel for them. We just call them. They're gonna look bad, ain't children.
Yeah.
Well, you can say that. It's easy to say that. But yeah, they are troublesome. They carjacking and stealing cars and speeding down the street. Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's a problem. But what caused it? And who's responsible? The parents responsible. We ain't got nothing to do with it. I understand. I hear you, brother. But man, look. Okay, we can take that approach. But guess what? See, when a sore is left unattended to, it infects. And whereas it could have been contained to a small area on the body, the neglect could ultimately result in the loss of a limb or even worse, loss of life. So this soar of crime, lack of respect for our own lives has festered in our community long enough. So it's a call to action. We have to now begin to be willing to step out into the community. And before we get off the air, Brother Kenneth, I want to read something about the progressive movement.
Yes, sir.
Because, according to the same author, Ms. Williams, the progressive movement, the objective, they said was, the main objective was to eliminate corruption in government.
Yes.
Well, how did corruption get there?
Well, maybe it was one of those pictures you saw in the speakeasy.
See, it was, yeah, that's how it got there. See, the criminal underworld, they started buying folks.
Oh, yeah.
They had judges and senators and people in their pocket on payroll.
What they say in the movie The Godfather, the Don Corleone, they carrying those judges and politicians in your pocket like loose change.
Like loose change. That's what he said. And I remember the Untouchables, Elliot Ness. The main man they had to get to was that accountant with that ledger.
Yeah.
Who was being paid what?
Yeah.
And old Elliot Ness, when he got him an Irish cop, a big cop.
Yeah.
And my man told him, when Elliot Ness told him what he was trying to do, that man asked Elliot Ness, what are you prepared to do? Because you finna take on something far bigger than you are giving due estimation to. So their main objective was to eliminate corruption out of government. Now the article continues, it says the success of progressivism owed much to publicly generated or publicity generated by the muckrackers, writers who detailed the horrors of poverty, urban slums, dangerous factory conditions, and child labor, among a host of other ills.
Yes.
The ills being crime.
Right.
So, long story short, we're running out of time. We're going to continue this tomorrow, Brother Kenneth, because I want to get to something that happened in Memphis recently.
Inshallah.
God willing. But these are the things that in history to address the gang problem among whites in this country. And the same attitudes amongst the dominant society exists when it comes to when they are beset with the problem. Like now they're beset with the problem of drug addiction amongst predominantly their people. So now the response is quite different than it was when it was a crack problem.
Yes, sir.
It was a crime problem when it was a crack problem, but now it's an opioid addiction problem. It's a public health crisis.
Look at the language. Health crisis.
It's a crisis.
See, you hear the word crisis, that means, we got to deal with this right now.
So now they're locking up the real drug dealer. The one that has on a white coat and a name embroidered on it. It can write on a slip of paper and send it to a pharmacy.
Wow. He ain't got to stand out on the corner.
No, he ain't got to stand. He got a brick and mortar location.
Oh.
He got a desk, got a phone line, he got patients, steady stream.
Wow.
Who's got health coverage. He got health plan.
Well, he getting his money.
He got a prescription plan.
Oh, my goodness.
So, and these are the things we got to look at. I know some people out there are going, ouch, man, they tripping. No. See, brothers and sisters, we're going to have this conversation. We're going to talk about it, speak straight words. When it comes to the problems in the black community, brother and sister, you're going to have to understand it. We collectively are going to have to understand. We cannot continue to sit around and wait until the right person get in office before we do something about what's going on in the hood. Like Ice Cube used to say, or said on Boys in the Hood, either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's happening in the hood. And it's the same today. So, brother, we got 5 minutes left. I guess I got to begin to shut down. And, man, we got quite a few people listening to us, watching us. I know from my Facebook feed, I'm like, and I hadn't been able to go. I hadn't even taken time to go out over on the YouTube live feed, brother, to see what's going on over there. Let me take a quick peek real quick. Oh, okay, we got some people over here. Brother Stephen on, Sister Jill, Sister Carmen, Brother Maliko, Miles. Thank you all for tuning in on the Facebook, the YouTube live stream, all of you. We pray that, we're sharing some good information, but we're going to continue this tomorrow, the question of what we must do. We're going to bring it up to some recent events as it relates to the attempts, if you will, by some to address the problems that we face in our community. As we get ready to close out this evening, we ask that you would subscribe to the Final Call newspaper. Make sure you get your weekly copy of the Final Call newspaper. If you want it delivered to your door, give us a call at 901-286-5034. Come and visit us at Muhammad Mosque number 55, located at 873 Vance Avenue. Our meeting days and times: Sundays at 10 a.m. The doors open at 9. Come and visit us. The Mid-South representative of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan represents the message here, for whom he would duly deputize in his absence. So come and join us Sunday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. We're back again Monday night at 7:30 for our men's only class. We are preparing to mount up and go out into the community among our people to offer to them a word that will hopefully inspire them to improve their own lives and living conditions. That's Monday at 7:30. Men are invited, brothers only. You can come and learn what it is that we are taught in the Nation of Islam. We're back again Wednesday night at 7:30 for our midweek study class. And again there Friday night at 7:30 for our self-improvement study class. Both Wednesdays and Fridays classes are attended by both men and women. And of course, Saturday we have the women's only class. The reflections of the men only class, that'll be Saturday morning, 9 o'clock a.m. for the MGT GCC class, all taking place at 873 Vance Avenue here in the city of Memphis. Call our conflict resolution hotline. We're trying to resolve the conflicts that we see going on amongst our young people, and it's on us to do. So give us a call at 901-303-8961. If you're not in the immediate Memphis area, come on now. If you're a little south of us, back Kent, yes, sir, down there in North Mississippi. Right. You used to say in the back in the day, N-I, cricket letter, I, cricket letter, I, humpback, I. If you're down in the Mississippi, visit us at 1495 Brookhaven. Brother Student Minister James Muhammad, the South Haven Study Group, and the Believers there. They meet Sundays at 10 a.m. Wednesday nights at 7:30, Friday nights at 7:30. You can on Comcast, Channel 17, Monday evenings at 5:30 p.m. for the Self-Improvement Talk Show hosted by Student Minister James Muhammad of the South Haven Study Group. We're on again Thursdays at 4 o'clock p.m. for the Final Call Hour, and once again on Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. for New Woman, New Nation. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if you want to advertise with the S.O.S. radio program, send us your email at savingourselves19@yahoo.com. That's going to do it for us today, Brother Ken. I like that discussion, man. But hey, God willing, we'll be back tomorrow for more of the S.O.S. radio program. Until then, I'm your host, Brother Andre Muhammad, signing off with my co-host, Brother Kenneth X, signing off, and we greet you as we came before you with the greeting words of peace of Assalamu alaikum.
All right, thank y'all for tuning in. Once again, the conversation about us will be back tomorrow. Everybody join in this music. That's the only way we're gonna be everybody singing this sweet refrain. Sing this melody till it gets into the brain. Well, I'm talking to you, Muslim, Christian, and Hebrew. Anything to do with God to your matter, as we are through.